News Radio 1000 KTOK. I'm Gwin Faulconer-Lippert. Good evening, everyone. This past week, you perhaps remember the PIKE off, OTA, and other lawsuits were in a hearing in front of the Oklahoma Supreme Court. And tonight with me by phone, I have Tom Elmore, who is very familiar with this and was one of the speakers in front of the Supreme Court. Tom Elmore is an independent transportation consultant, and he is here this evening to set the scene and help us get a picture of what happened. And also, Tom, at some point, we should probably tell people how they, too, can go online and watch the proceedings. Now, I must share with you from the beginning, I tuned in at the appointed time in front of the Supreme Court, and I saw you, among others, talking to one person.
That's right.
Were there no judges there?
The referee's name was Rogers, and he was the only one officiating at that particular meeting.
Do Supreme Court justices normally not sit in on hearings or whatever they are? What would they call that if they're not there?
The Supreme Court.
They call it a reading and not a hearing.
Well, the Supreme Court does what it does, and it does it the way that it does it. It's interesting that some of the legal actions that have been brought by the citizens in the Norman area against this whole business were taken first to the Cleveland County District Court. Judges there opted out, recused themselves, this, that, and the other. The case was ultimately moved to Seminole.
Seminole?
Because Cleveland County's district court punted rather than take the issue up.
We're acting like everybody knows what we're talking about. We are talking about the Oklahoma Turnpike Authority trying to put in place a plan called, wait a minute, I say it wrong. I always say Access Oklahoma, and it's Access Oklahoma. Access Oklahoma
is a much better, much more accurate name, actually.
Where they want to expand our current turnpike system, and according to them, to meet the demands of our current traffic and future traffic situations.
Right.
And by doing this, I should turn this over to you because you are one of the people that made the presentation. It is going to displace hundreds of families that have had property in these areas for over 100 years, some of them.
Well, let me be clear. I am not a member of the protesting organizations, citizen organizations in Norman. And I am not a party to the lawsuits. There are at least two that have been brought by the affected citizens there. There are two different lines of reasoning on the suits that have been brought, people ask me, do you have property that's affected? Well, I know more than all of us are affected in the state of Oklahoma. I don't have any property that is threatened directly with destruction the way a lot of these people's homes are. But I have been fighting this, Gwin, since the late 1990s. And I have been warning landowners that they needed to get their heads in the game and that they needed to pay attention. Some of us together stopped this matter when it was first proposed, actually by ODOT, although we knew that it was going to be a turnpike project. You had ODOT working for the Turnpike Authority, and they're supposed to be separate organizations. Well, get it straight, Oklahomans. It is a charade. They are not separate organizations. They are the same gang involved in the same business, and that business is to get your money away from you and to put it in the pockets of their friends. That's what they do.
Who are their friends that would benefit
well,
from this?
Golly, it's every day. We have developers, bankers. We have other big shots. Look, the point being made that functionally, there was actually an effort made to pass laws which would have actually merged, actually combined ODOT and the Oklahoma Turnpike Authority. It's unconstitutional to do this, but they're doing all kinds of things already with the blessing of the Oklahoma State Supreme Court are clearly unconstitutional.
It is still unconstitutional?
Oh, positively. And the reality is that the Supreme Court has compromised itself on this matter for many years. And as a matter of course, the state Supreme Court signs off on whatever ODOT or OTA brings them. Sometime back, the Oklahoma Department of Transportation wanted a $200 million bond package to widen the shoulders on the two-lane road system. This all started when they passed the $1 billion highway package in 1996. They couldn't get to $1 billion through regular appropriations, so they included something on the order of $300 million in bonds. It's unconstitutional. The Constitution of the state says you put the state of Oklahoma in debt, you establish a direct tax to repay that debt. Bond debt is not contemplated. This is one of the reasons we have a Turnpike Authority, because it is unconstitutional for a state agency to do what the Turnpike Authority does. But this apparently does not matter to the Supreme Court. And in 1996, our great friend and champion Jerry Fent, who happened to be at the hearing last Tuesday, came in the company of Mike Reynolds, a former state legislator who also spoke there. Jerry did not speak. Mike did speak. And Jerry brought suit against aspects of the $1 billion highway package. Well, the word was that all test votes went against the highway package, but the final vote went for it. And at that time, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Yvonne Calgar, said, her explanation was, well, we need good roads, don't we? That is not the business of the Supreme Court. Whether or not we need good roads is not the business of the Supreme Court. The business of the Supreme Court is to uphold the Constitution to protect the people of the state of Oklahoma from the excesses of elected and appointed government.
And
it apparently didn't matter to Chief Justice Calgar what the business of the Supreme Court was. On the other hand, her colleague, late Justice Alma Wilson, said, this is evil. It's going to lead to more evil. Well, we are living today with the evil of which Justice Wilson was warning. And the thing is, as I said at the I was allowed to speak, and I've said what seems like a very harsh assessment of the Oklahoma Supreme Court. I must say, I was pleasantly surprised and heartened at the reception. We had a full courtroom. On one side of the aisle were all the highway boys, and there's a vast web of people who stand to benefit from all of this. On the other side of the aisle were those of us who are protesting all of this, and it was a full house. We were welcomed, I would say warmly, by the assistants to the court. We were allowed to speak. There are many meetings, and especially meetings with which ODOT and OTA have to do, that citizens are not allowed to speak. Certain of the bond meetings and so on, citizens are not allowed to speak. It's our money, but we're not allowed to speak. Nevertheless, how long did this meeting last? Yes, it was nearly. I think it was nearly 2 hours. It seemed it was actually everything was done pretty compactly. The attorneys, the OTA attorney led, and he had a lengthy statement. And then Rob Norman and the other attorneys followed up for the protesters, and they had an absolutely devastating case against what the Turnpike Authority is trying to do. What the Turnpike Authority is trying to do is to say that laws that were passed by the legislature in the 80s, which authorized these turnpikes, each has to be authorized by the state legislature. And they insist that the turnpikes that they are now imposing on the people of Cleveland and McLean County were authorized in the 80s. The problem is the law itself and the press coverage of what the public officials, Governor Bellman specifically, and others had to say, including Neil McCaleb, was that what was authorized in the 80s was an all-or-nothing deal. If you're going to build a turnpike loop around Oklahoma City, then you have to do something for Tulsa as well. And if you don't do something for Tulsa, it's all or nothing. Well, they got down to the matter, and they didn't have the money to do all the projects they wanted to do then. So their authorization for projects which were not chosen and which were not pursued at that time, as the attorneys for the protesters clearly showed, it's now moot. It is now no longer in effect. Well, the Turnpike Authority insists that it is.
Good cliffhanger. Hold on, and I will pick it up with there. Tom Elmore is my guest. He is an independent transportation consultant, and he was at the hearing in front of the Oklahoma Supreme Court last week about the turnpikes and what has happened. And if you like twists and turns and things you hadn't anticipated, you need to stick around, because wait till you hear this one. You're listening to 1000 KTOK. I'm Gwin Faulconer-Lippert. News Radio 1000 KTOK. I'm Gwin Faulconer-Lippert. This past week, many interested groups appeared before the Oklahoma Supreme Court. They made presentations to what they call a referee. There were no justices in the hearing. But they made presentations about a program that is called Access Oklahoma. It is the Oklahoma Turnpike Authority wanting to expand its turnpike system and build more turnpikes. Now, there are so many different layers of this particular issue. And Tom Elmore is an independent transportation consultant who faced this issue in the 80s. And was one of the people that spoke out against the Oklahoma Turnpike Authority then. As Tom has presented to us, because he was a presenter at the Supreme Court hearing this past Tuesday, he was there among many of the protesters that live directly in the path of three of the turnpikes that all go across Cleveland County. Also, there was former Representative Mike Reynolds, who has an issue with getting the state into debt and overspending, and Jerry Fent, who is an attorney known for taking the state of Oklahoma and others to court when they violate the Oklahoma Constitution. So, Tom, you were getting ready to make a statement about... So they drew up this plan in the 80s. We thought it went away. And now this most recent action actually goes back to that, doesn't it?
Well, in those years, the legislation in the Oklahoma legislature had very specifically stipulated that 4 turnpike expansion projects were authorized, but they had to be funded with a single bond issue if they were to be completed at all. The OTA, it was too big of a bite for the OTA. So the Kilpatrick, some of the others were built, but Others were not. The law said you have to do them all, or you have to go back to square one for your authorizations. These other projects have not been authorized. And when they did not build them under a single bond issue, then they lost their authorization to build them without going back to the state legislature and going through the process again. They have not done that. But what we got from the attorney representing the Turnpike Authority, his name is Jared Davidson, was a statement about the vast discretion and power of the Oklahoma Turnpike Authority. Why the legislature has such faith in them that it just says, we want a road over here from here to here, and you can choose where, and you're all such a bunch of experts that we're just going to turn it all over to you, and you can do anything you want to do.
And he is speaking for the Oklahoma legislature?
He's speaking for the Turnpike Authority. This is what the Turnpike
That's what
Authority
they want.
thinks of.
Yes, they want
This is
us
what
to
the Turnpike Authority thinks of itself, Gwen. It thinks it's God. It thinks it can run right over people. You know, there's a document known as the Declaration of Independence, which talks about government, the purpose of government being to secure the rights of the citizenry, life, liberty, and property, and to govern by the consent of the governed. Well, the governed were not consulted in this matter. Instead, we get the great Tim Gatz and Joe E. Kelly and these little scurrying ODOT engineers. Gwen, when you work at ODOT, you're not going to get on there unless you're a certain kind of guy. You've got to be willing to look at the public trust and put it second, and put your own interest and the interest of the people into whose pockets you're shoveling money. That comes first.
In the interest of this program, let me kind of bring us back to center a little bit. The Turnpike Authority had a person, you said was Jared Davidson. He presented their side. And then you presented, Representative Mike Reynolds, former representative, presented. Did Amy Serrato?
Dr. Amy Serrato presented as well, and her statement was very powerful about the research that she and her family did before they built their home in a place which, as it turns out, is directly in the crosshairs of this southern extension down to McLean County. By the way, it was pointed out that McLean County, Purcell, was never mentioned in any of the authorizations.
Ever.
They don't have the authorization to go there. And pardon me, not to put, I don't know, too fine a point on it, but I go back to the beginning of this and just make the point. OTA's personnel, Joe E. Kelly, the deputy director, has been an ODOT engineer. These guys are all from ODOT. They've all passed through the revolving door, as I started calling it years back, where it's hard to tell who you're talking to. It's the same people, but maybe today they're working for the other agency, or maybe, as in the case of DavidStreb and John Bowman, who were ODOT engineers for 30 years, they're now the president and vice president of Poe And Associates Engineers.
Tom Elmore is my guest. I'm Gwin Faulconer-Lippert. We will continue discussing Access Oklahoma and let you draw your own conclusions. You're listening to 1000 KTOK. News Radio 1000 KTOK. I'm Gwin Faulconer-Lippert. Tonight we're talking about Access Oklahoma with Tom Elmore, an independent transportation consultant. He spoke at the hearing for the Oklahoma Supreme Court this past week, and it became very evident that the Turnpike Authority, through their attorney, Jared Davidson, thinks that the stakeholders are not the citizens that live in this area or would use this or be affected, but the political leaders like the mayor or the councilman or whatever. And I think if you really want to be enlightened, Tom. Join Pike, No More Turnpikes. That's what it's called.
Well, I was just going to say, Pike Off OTA, PIKE, pikeoffota.com is the website of Pike Off OTA. Also, they have a YouTube page, which has a great many videos from the public meetings, from their debates and encounters with the OTA personnel. Also on Facebook is a wonderful page, No More Turnpikes, Oklahoma.
Yes.
And a lot of those videos are also there. There's a lot to this, and there's a lot of information. And I know that I, especially with the history that I have, because I've been doing this stuff for 30 years, Gwin, I know the players. I know what they've done. I know what they've said in the past, and I know how they've represented themselves on all of this. It was kind of interesting. Another wonderful attorney who presented, named Elaine Downing, said this. She said, OTA has asked for permission to build the South Extension before. They were denied that permission. This year, they didn't bother asking. Mike Reynolds, who was state legislator from 2002 to 2014, he said he did everything he could to kill. He said when he came into office, the biggest issue in his district, which was South Oklahoma City, was not any of the things that most folks are thinking about today. It was the threat of a turnpike. And he said he did everything he could do to kill a similar turnpike extension proposal. He said, I was told it was dead. Today I find out it's not as dead as I thought. It's quite interesting to me that somehow the authority has determined that they have legislative authority to try to piggyback these turnpikes on previous legislation, and I think it's absolutely disgusting. Mike Reynolds was there. He knows what he's talking about. The trouble we have here is you have an agency of bureaucrats who are exploiting the loss of institutional memory in the state legislature caused by the 12-year term limit.
Yeah.
So those of us who've been involved in this from the outside in have got to be their memory, and that's why I spoke. I really went to that particular meeting intending not to speak, but after I heard the representations of the Turnpike Authority's attorney about all of their expertise and all of their discretion, and they can do everything, they can do anything they want to do, and they can do it because ODOT's broke. Well, oddly, the guy who's the head of ODOT, the director of ODOT, Tim Gatz, is also director of the OTA. It looks to me like a setup. And make no mistake that the people at ODOT have very methodically set about to establish a highway monopoly in this state. By the way, the state constitution expressly forbids what it calls monopolies and perpetuities.
Of which these today, are both, right?
Oh, absolutely. And, you know, we once had a 900-mile state-owned railway system. Those railways were not purchased in 1981 by the state legislature because the legislators were rail fans. They were purchased to take heavy loads off of the public roads to protect them from the damage inflicted on them by heavy loads and by things such as the wheat harvest and things like that. They were to be folded into the public domain forever. But these men and their immediate antecedents in the bureaucratic offices where they now work very deliberately misrepresented the purposes for which the railways were originally bought, and they pretty well spun them all off. We only have about 150 miles of railway today that is owned by the state. The point is this. The attorney for the OTA, I made this point. It's important to understand why things are the way they are. The argument is made that we got to build turnpikes because turnpikes can support themselves with this independent bond funding, and apparently public roads can't. Well, why can't public roads support themselves? I said, understand that one semi-truck at its max legal weight is inflicting pavement damage equivalent to 9,600 automobiles. On the public's roads, that truck arguably pays less than 5 cents a mile. on the Turner Turnpike, that truck cannot pay less than 20.8 cents a mile. The trouble is, both of these agencies have the same director. Why doesn't that director get the same deal for the taxpayers and their roads that he gets for his private anonymous investors on the turnpikes? And say, well, ODOT is not a legislative organization. Yes, but ODOT is where the transportation experts are. And they need to be pressing the case for righteous returns from heavy commercial users of our public roads. They refuse to do that. Why do they refuse to do that? Well, that gets you into a lot of political binds. The trucking lobby is very powerful. In fact, the Oklahoma Transportation Commission has 3 big-time truckers as commissioners. Who on that commission is really looking out for the public roads?
Well, and what about the public roads?
Well, today ODOT admits ODOT admits $60 billion in unfunded highway maintenance requirement on the state's public roads. It's more than that. Make no mistake about it. And I made the point, and it goes directly to the matter with the Supreme Court, that after the $1 billion highway package with that bond indebtedness was passed in 1996, and Jerry Fent protested before the Supreme Court, unfunded highway maintenance requirement was said to be $11 billion. Truck traffic on the state's major routes was 5.6 billion annual vehicle miles traveled. The representation had been made by Neil McCaleb, the governor, and others, that if we passed a $1 billion highway bill, that roads would be better 5 years hence.
That's what they promised. Yes.
I warned that they would be worse, and in 2001, but that era's director, Gary Ridley, admitted it had jumped to $40 billion in unfunded maintenance need and $13.4 billion in heavy truck volume on the state's major routes, both roughly 45% a year growth. But today they want us to believe that it's only grown $20 billion in the intervening 20 years since then. Well, this is the predicate. This is what the whole argument for turnpikes is predicated on. We can't afford to build public roads. We can't afford to build public roads because ODOT's broke. But OTA's director is ODOT's director. The conflict of interest, I will never forget that following the passage of the $1 billion highway package, ODOT's longtime chief engineer, Bruce Taylor, did something I've never seen a chief engineer do. He called a press conference at one of the governor's conference rooms. And when all the reporters jumped up and said, okay, you got $1 billion now, what you going to do first? He said, look, guys, first of all, $1 billion is not that much money. Second of all, we have a very unique position in Oklahoma. There's only so much material, so many contractors, and so much time. And we have our own competition built in the form of the Oklahoma Turnpike Authority, and their boss is our boss, Neil McCaleb, who for the first time in 1995, Governor Frank Keating appointed director of both agencies. It had not been done before. The point that Bruce Taylor was trying to make to the chronically uncurious Oklahoma press was, we have a massive glaring conflict of interest here, and you all need to get to the bottom of it.
All right, we'll pick it up with that. Tom Elmore is my guest, independent transportation consultant. We're talking about Access Oklahoma. You're listening to 1000 KTOK. News Radio 1000 KTOK. I'm Gwin Faulconer-Lippert here with Tom Elmore, independent transportation consultant. We're discussing Access Oklahoma, the toll road system that the Oklahoma Turnpike Authority says they have the authorization to build and use eminent domain to take your property, whether you have the Rose Rock Sanctuary on your property or Lake Thunderbird drinking water on your property. If they want it, they think they can take it. So, Tom, we have about 8 minutes left. What do we do about this?
Well, I would urge Oklahomans to call the Supreme Court. Tell them what you think about turnpikes generally and about all of this authority that the Turnpike Authority says they have. Just to be clear about the hearing last Tuesday, the matter at hand was the Supreme Court's blessing, authorization for the first $500 million in bonds for the proposed projects are $5 billion. But this is the beginning. 500 million is what the Supreme Court is being asked to bless to sign off on. Well, it's being asked to sign off on projects which do not meet the legal standards of being authorized by the state legislature. That authorization expired when those projects were not built under one bond funding in the 1980s. It is important that Oklahomans realize there are, I think it's 16 different turnpike projects which the Turnpike Authority claims that they have authorization to build.
16?
And they're all over the state.
16?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. They are all over the state. And it may be you next. You may think that this is not worth your attention. This goes to the heart of responsive and accountable government in the state of Oklahoma. It goes to the heart of the question, does government exist to secure and protect the rights of the citizens to life, liberty, and property, or does it exist to run over the citizens and take their property for the benefit of its friends and sponsors? The question is government about public interest, public convenience, and public necessity? Is that how our money and our efforts should be spent? Or is it about commonizing costs, privatizing profits? The Oklahoma Turnpike Authority is about commonizing costs and privatizing profits. That money, none of the Turnpike Authority's profits comes back to the state of Oklahoma. Not one penny. People need to understand this. And they need to understand that they are dealing with a level of arrogance. This whole thing is a charade. These people are trying to bamboozle citizens whom they believe have forgotten the way it's supposed to work. I was so grateful for the attorneys who made their presentations. My old friend Dave Moore, who was also involved in shutting this thing down back in 1999. Dave was really the guy that carried the load back in 1999 with his Control the Loop organization, also spoke. And there were others who spoke as well about their own homes and about the hardship that this is placing on them. The thing is this, as Dr. Amy Serrato, and she herself is a civil engineer, a professor of civil engineering at the University of Oklahoma, and she said it is time to take the authority from OTA completely away, and notably to take away their authority to terrorize landowners with these threats. Once this is done, once you know that you're in the path of one of these roads, your life is not the same. Your peace of mind, your sleep, your view of the world is no longer the same, because your castle, your home, is in the hands of people who do not give a rip about your God-given right to own your own property. So it is critical that Oklahomans recognize the gravity of this and take this seriously. Contact your elected officials. Tell them. The Turnpike Authority needs to be taken down. By the way, Governor Kevin Stitt is actually an ex officio member of the board of the Oklahoma Turnpike Authority. By the way, if you call up the Oklahoma Turnpike Authority Board of Directors on the internet, you will note names that you probably never heard before, and there are no biographies. And you can't get a biography. I've asked. No biographies. We don't know who these people are, but they are out here threatening people's homes. So we can lay it at the feet of the governor who went along with all of this. Here's the thing. The governor's a Republican, and the state Republican Party platform specifically says no more eminent domain for turnpikes. No more turnpikes until the original turnpikes are paid off and turned back to the people as they were supposed to be.
And where would you see that? I don't see that anywhere.
Call it up on the state Republican Party's website.
Really?
Absolutely.
I will check that.
And the Republican platform is the result of, from the precinct meeting to the county convention to the state convention. That's how the voice of the grassroots is made known. And of course, it's also true, Gwen, that as a matter of course, a lot of our elected officials get elected with a lot of promises to respect the wishes of the people, but they don't. And today, with a 12-year term limit, they know they're only going to be there 12 years. They're thinking about what they're going to do at the end of that 12 years from the first time their rumps hit the cushion of that chair. So it is, kind of shot her own feet off back there in 1990. Can't necessarily do anything about that right now. But the people of Oklahoma have got to make it clear to elected government, to the Turnpike Authority, to ODOT, and I would say to the Supreme Court. Respectfully, certainly.
Do you think
this is not acceptable?
The Supreme Court listens to citizens? I thought they were supposed to rule based on constitutional right and wrong.
Well, that's what I thought too. And then Chief Justice Calgar says we need good roads, don't we? As if doing what was done, as I pointed out when that was said, this is how we got the roads we have, by doing this kind of snaky stuff. And as a matter of history, in the 5 years following the passage of the $1 billion highway package with $300 million in bond indebtedness, roads got far worse, far faster, just as I predicted. Well, that becomes the argument for ODOT's broke. ODOT's $60 billion in the hole trying to keep up the public roads, so we have to build turnpikes. But all of the personnel and all of the surrounding people, the contractors and others, look at them. They have all been involved in the bureaucracy at one time or another. Joey Kelly at a recent alleged stakeholder meeting, supposedly the public was invited. I sure didn't hear anything about it, and I don't know anybody else who did. But the videotape, which was made by Dave Moore and others there, he insists that, this is all for the public good. We're going to take your home away from you. We're going to trample your property rights for the public good. It doesn't fly.
So,
and it is critical.
So we need to contact our legislator, the Supreme Court, the governor, anyone in any elected office.
And I would say, if you have any questions about it, virtually all of these videos, the Supreme Court video and so on, are on the No More Turnpikes Oklahoma Facebook page or on Pike Off OTA's Facebook page or their website. And Pike Off OTA also has a great page on YouTube with a whole lot of background videos as well as these current things. People need to hear. They need to see the arrogance.
They need to see the whole presentation because the Turnpike people present and the Pike Off people. Yes.
Positively.
So they can get both sides. Yes.
I assure you that the protesters in Norman, Pike Off OTA, their attorneys, the other protesters and their attorneys, friends, they're not just fighting for themselves. They're fighting for you and your family. Support them, help them. And maybe you won't have to fight this battle yourself when they come knocking on your door wanting to take your farm, your home, your property.
Tom Elmore, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, ma'am.
All right. Good night.